Well, good evening. My name is Eric Latif. Welcome to the summit where we continue with our coverage of Kivumbi 2022, looking back at what has happened throughout the day today and, of course, still tracking what's been happening in this election season. So today what we know is that the opposition, the candidate for Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party, Raila Odinga, has said they are not ready to accept the result that was announced by Wafula Chebukati, the IEBC chairman, yesterday. We've also seen today the 4 IEBC commissioners who walked out of Bomas yesterday, addressing another media conference where today they were seeking to explain the reason why they decided to disassociate themselves with the result that was announced by their chairman. So there are very many things that are happening. There is clear indication that the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition is heading to the Supreme Court because Raila Odinga said they're going to pursue all constitutional and legal means to get a just result out of this exercise. So most likely going to the Supreme Court. What does that mean? Now, looking at what Raila himself said, where he was mirroring a lot of what had been said earlier by the IEBC commissioners, it's clear that these issues that were raised by the IEBC commissioners will form part of their arguments. But what do we know? We are going to have this conversation with constitutional lawyer Charles Kanjama, who joins me in the studio. Charles, good evening.
Good evening, Eric.
Good to have you in this evening. It's been a day of drama, just 0.01.
Yes, percent
can actually mean so much.
Indeed.
Who knew? Who had even calculated, the tally that was given by IEBC chairman yesterday? Who had tried to total it and see, it's come to 100.01, or does it?
Yes. I think the first comments that were made in social media about the tally of the IEBC commissioner coming to 100.01%. And I thought those were just social media warriors making comments. I was quite surprised, I must say, when the 4 commissioners who walked out of Bomas in protest at Chairman Chebukati relied on that as their first ground for their protest at the results. I was really taken aback because it is purely a rounding issue. Round up, round down. Sometimes when you do the rounding, you end up with a figure that looks to be inaccurate, not 100%, but that is because of rounding. And I was quite surprised because really that did not amount to the kind of fundamental error that would make you storm out of Bomas. And also the vice chair, after making her own computation of what is 0.01%, she made an error in the magnitude of 1 to 100 and said it amounts to 140,000 votes instead of 1,400 votes, which was a bit perturbing.
Now, if you look at what their arguments were this afternoon, the 4 commissioners, that is, they seem to dwell a lot on that fact of, these are the mathematical absurdities, as they call them, of what was declared by Wafula Chebukati. But they also spoke about what they felt was them being locked out of a crucial part of the process. Did you pick that out? And what is this crucial part of the process that were locked out?
I think there's a debate that is ongoing in legal circles as to what is the role of the commission, IEBC, in an election, and what is the role of the returning officer. And in every election, IEBC always gazettes a returning officer for that election. And the 4 commissioners insinuated that the presidential election does not have a returning officer, a national returning officer, even though IEBC does gazette the chair of the commission as a returning officer. And Article 86 of the Constitution says that for voting to be free and fair, you need a presiding officer in every polling station and a returning officer for every election. And so the returning officer gets delegated authority from IEBC, from the commission, to be the one to declare the results. And in the case of the presidential election, Article 138 says in paragraph 10 that the chair of the commission shall declare the result. But in paragraph 4 of the same article, it says the commission shall count and tally the votes. And so the question is, whose responsibility is it to count and tally? Is it of the returning officer or of the commission as a whole? So the commissioner's argument was that it is the role of the commission to count and tally the votes for the presidential election. And their job was not just to go and declare the results after the Form 34Bs, which tally the polling stations into the 290 constituencies, had been brought in. They were meant to be involved in the tallying of the 34Bs, which are 290 or 291 of them, into the 47 counties, which are then put into the Form 34C. And of course, this is an issue of debate, but the commissioners made reference to a decision of IBC versus Maina Kiai in the Court of Appeal, where the Court of Appeal says that it cannot be part of the constitutional structure that the IBC chair on his own will do all the process of verifying, tallying, and declaring the results. So according to them, Chebukati failed to keep them informed of the ongoing tally. And then he just brought the final document with the tally telling them these are the figures. So that was their concern. And Chebukati, on the other hand, his argument, I believe, is that every returning officer is given authority to tally and declare the results for that particular election, whether it is a ward election, whether it is a constituency election, a gubernatorial election. It could be the constituency returning officer, the county tallying officer, or himself as the national returning officer. So that was the place where the division is between Chebukati on one hand and the other commissioners.
Seeking some clarifications here. Number one, on the definition of commission.
Yes.
Does this imply the chairman and the commissioners plus the CEO, who's the secretary to the commission, only? Or does it talk about the entire body corporate of the commission, which includes the clerks, everybody who's employed by the commission to work for this election? And why I'm asking this is, so when the returning officers from the several constituencies arrive at Bomas and they go to the various tables, are they engaging with a commission or are they not engaging with a commission? When the commissioners come to say, this is the result that we have received from constituency XYZ, and I will read the result, is that the commission announcing, or is that the commission itself announcing? I mean, where do we draw the line between, the commission shall interrogate, the commission shall tally, the returning officer shall declare and announce?
So the courts have dealt on several occasions with the interpretation of what it means when you say commission in reference to a constitutional commission. And they've said two things. One, the commission, first of all, is the commissioners. And the commissioners have the executive mandate, the mandate to implement the constitutional functions that are bestowed on that particular commission. And then second, the commission also includes the secretariat of the commission and the staff of the commission. But the secretariat and staff of the commission cannot act in the absence of the direction of the commissioners.
Right.
And that is why where a commission does not have commissioners and they engage in serious policy engagement, that can be nullified by the court. So there's an area there where the courts have tried to insist on the importance of the role of the commissioners in performing the job of the commission. So when the returning officers came, when they went to the floor and they were engaging the IT team in the presence of the agents for the parties, yes, they were engaging the commission. And all those processes that were taking place with the presiding officers, the polling clerks, all that, the materials that were being used, all that was part of the commission. So the question is, when the Constitution says the commission shall do something, does it require a decision of the commissioners? And the argument, I believe, of Chebukati's side is that the moment the commission gives legal authority to a returning officer, the returning officer is the one who tallies and declares the results without consulting the commission. So, for example, when there were elections in Mathare constituency, in Meru County, the respective constituency and county returning officer declared the results. They did not need to send them to the commission for the commissioners to concur in the declaration of the result. So
neither did they even need to have a consultation with their deputy returning officers.
Yes, exactly, because they receive an individual authority to declare the result. So Chebukati's argument is that based on Article 138.10, read together with Article 86, he has the sole authority to declare the result as the national returning officer. And the interesting thing is that that same decision of Minor Kiai in the Court of Appeal has the following quote, which I would like to read. It says, "It cannot be denied that the chairperson of the commission has a significant constitutional role under sub-article 10 of Article 138 as the authority with the ultimate mandate of making the declaration that brings to finality the presidential election process." Of course, before he makes that declaration, his role is to accurately tally all the results exactly as received from the 290 returning officers countrywide, without adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing, and so forth. So this same decision that the four commissioners who stormed out of Bomas are using actually recognizes the power and authority of the chair to both tally and declare the result of the national election. So for them, they are saying he couldn't do it without the concurrence of the commission. And him is saying the constitution and the law allows him to do it.
Is there anywhere where it talks about decisions of the commission being made concurrently, I mean with the concurrence of all members of the commission, or at least a majority?
Yes,
it's
so
either unanimous or majority decision.
Yes, so when the commission makes a decision, and this is elaborated in the IBC Act, the commission can only decide unanimously or by majority. So then I think the confusion comes because when the returning officer is making a declaration, ultimately that is delegated authority of the commission. But even though it is delegated authority of the commission, it is now at the level of the returning officer to make the decision. So because Chebukati has two roles, he is both the chair of the commission and the returning officer of the national election, it's very easy for people to assume every time he acts, he's acting as the chair of the commission, for which he needs a majority of the commissioners. And people don't distinguish with the time when he's acting as the returning officer of the presidential election, for where he has sole authority under the constitution.
In how many incidences do we see Chebukati acting as returning officer of the presidential election? Just take us through the last 7 days.
I think it's so easy when you look at the presidential election aside all the other elections.
Okay.
So think about the returning officer of the gubernatorial election or of a constituency election. When do they act as the returning officer? First of all, they can give directions to the officials who are under them in the process of the opening of the ballot boxes. In the case of the presiding officers, in the case of the returning officers, they wait to receive results from the presiding officer. So the presiding officers, after they have finished the counting at each polling station, they take the result declaration form to the returning officer at either constituency or county level. So the returning officer receives the results. He confirms that the form is authentic. He signs, this presiding officer signs as well. And then he puts it in his own form and tallies the information. That's what the returning officer does. He shows the tally to the party agents, and then he puts the total, he signs, and they can sign. That's what returning officers do. So when Chebukati is acting as a returning officer in the last 7 days, you remember there is a day he went and he made an announcement that from now we are changing the procedure. When the returning officers come, you will first come to my desk and you will present your result forms. At that stage, he was acting as a returning officer. He was telling them, bring the results, the Form 34Bs. I'll confirm that you have received them. Then you will go to the floor of Bomas and they will be verified with the IT staff who are there.
Okay.
And the agents will be present. That was being done under the supervision of the returning officer because that's what he does. He tallies. Then after the tally comes out, he announces the results. So what happens when the other commissioners in IBC were announcing results? Were they announcing the results for president as commissioners or under the delegated authority
of the returning
officer? So for them, they believed probably that they were announcing the results as commissioners. And yet, it is the practice that the chair, delegates part of the role of announcing results to his fellow commissioners so that they can assist him without losing his role as the returning officer of the national election. So that issue is one of the things that will be debated or discussed in the Supreme Court. It is anticipated when Azimio take their case to the Supreme Court. And they'll be trying to convince the Supreme Court that the same decision of Maina Kiai says, this task is too big for the chair to handle alone. He must work with the other commissioners, and it is the commission which is meant to concur before results are declared. That is where the controversy is.
What then would this concurrence be? If the result has, the final tally has been arrived at, and it's time for the chair, the returning officer to sign and the agents to sign,
yes.
What is this concurrence with the other commissioners? Is it for them to do? Is it for them to just look at and say, yeah, we have seen it, we agree? Or is it for them to say, no, just change that decimal point?
In fact, Eric, that's a good question. What happens if there is disagreement, as has happened now, between the chair and some commissioners?
Yeah, a majority of the commissioners.
In this case, a majority. So what happens? Of course, the Constitution has a structure that requires for good governance that you are transparent, and in electoral processes that everything is verifiable. That is why even the party agents are given an opportunity to see the form before it can be finalized. So what Chebukati is expected to do as an issue of, I guess, a committee with the commissioners is to also be able to show them these are the results. Have you seen anything wrong here? Because the whole country is interested in them. And the four commissioners say that Chebukati did not do this. And the question is, was it something that he had to do, or it was something that in good practice he should have done? I think that's where
it's the political goodwill of it.
Yes.
And then for the general acceptability of the process.
Yes.
Politically speaking, not technically, not by law.
Yes. And I think it is good practice that a chair of a commission who's playing that role of national returning officer should, after showing the party agents the result forms, or even before, show them to the commissioners. The same way the party agents should see the result, the tally. The commissioners, I guess, they shouldn't get shocked by seeing the tally when the rest of the country is seeing it. And they actually say that Chebukati showed them the tally, but they were not involved in the back end of coming up with the tally. And so there were some questions that they asked and they feel they were not answered appropriately.
In your legal opinion, Charles, does what is being alleged by the four commissioners constitute a fatal flaw to the process of this election?
So the Elections Act has an important section 83, which indicates on what grounds an election can be overturned. And that provision is trying to apply the Constitution, which has a number of important articles, including 81 and 86. The bottom line of the Constitution is that elections must be free and fair. They must be verifiable, transparent. The figures must you must be able to trace the figures. The figures must manifest or reflect the will of the voter in the polling station. And then the Elections Act says that there are two grounds broadly upon which an election can be overturned. Either it has failed the quantitative test. In other words, the votes that have been indicated do not reflect the votes cast. Or it could be the qualitative test. In other words, the processes that took place, because election is a process, not an event, were so marred by irregularities that they introduced significant doubt as to whether the outcome was free and fair. In regard to the quantitative test, it's a very simple one. It's a question of maths. And from what I have heard, there is no, at the moment, contestation regarding the Form 34As, which contain the declarations at the polling stations. So if there is a contestation, either about the 34Bs or the 34C, then it's very easy to retally. And that retallying can be done easily because for most of the 34Bs, as I'm aware, they were verified in the presence of party agents of both parties. And the party agents approved that, yes, these ones are okay. So it would be possible to say 270 or 280 of the 34Bs, we have no problem with them. Let's retally these 10 that we have a problem with. And that can be done even under the supervision of the Supreme Court. If the figures end up reflecting what Chebukati has declared, that would not be ground to overturn the election. If they show serious discrepancies, it could be. On the qualitative test, the question would be, did the failure of Chebukati to consult his commissioners, assuming it is proven, did it so introduce doubt into these figures that you cannot even trust the figures at all? If there is a challenge with the voter turnout, is there a way of verifying from the KIMS kit that the KIMS kit figures are consistent with the voter turnout that has been reflected in the result declaration form? And
there you've introduced something actually which is fundamental. And I'd like you to stay behind for a bit so we can then delve deeper into that, into what we anticipate then, what would Azimio and the presidential candidate Raila Odinga be taking before the Supreme Court? What would their arguments be? Let's first of all take a quick break and see what is coming up in the news with Ken Mijungu. This is Kivumbi 2022. My name is Eric Latif. Advocate Charles Kanjama is here with us. We are talking about what we've seen today, just trying to understand what are the commissioners saying, what is Raila Odinga saying, what are we expecting to see coming up in the Supreme Court. Keep it here. Let's look at the top stories shortly, and then we continue briefly with the conversation with Charles.